Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Junkyard Dawgcast. I'm your host, Jordan Hill. Got the whole crew with us, Kipp Adams and Ben Wolk, on this Tuesday afternoon. And, fellas, believe it or not, it is game week. The Georgia Bulldogs getting ready to play Clemson on Saturday, 12 p.m. kickoff down there in Atlanta's Mercedes-Benz Stadium. And let's just start from the top. Ben, we're getting ready to go to a game on Saturday. I mean, how excited are you to get this thing going?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I get a little bit of an appetizer with some high school football getting started. It gives me a little bit of taste of things, but I can see it in y'all's eyes this week that that there's real football that's going on, and so I'm excited to be able to join you guys for that Georgia Clemson game on Saturday.
Yeah, some of those lower tier college football games over the weekend and the Atlanta Falcons preseason games, it can only take us so far. Isn't that right, Kip?
Yeah, but how about that Florida State Georgia Tech game? That was quite the appetizer. I mean, definitely one of the quicker games. It felt like as far as possessions, but it had a little bit of everything. And college kickers. I mean, the bar was set for this season. When you're out there just nailing 50 plus yarders and game winning field goals, it's I mean, honestly, I wasn't prepared for that at all. I'm used to the exact opposite. So, yeah, I'm ready for some chaos.
Yeah, I think we'll have plenty of it. And like Kip said, I think there was 7 possessions apiece in that Georgia Tech Florida State game. So I don't know if we're going to see more of that going forward, but that definitely was an interesting start to the 2024 season. Well, fellas, let's turn our attention to Georgia and Clemson. As we said, number 1 Georgia, number 14 Clemson, highly anticipated game in week 1. And a lot to discuss on this episode. We're going to talk about what we heard from Kirby Smart and players on Monday, some of our thoughts on Clemson, some of the recurring questions and ongoing questions we got about Georgia as they get ready for this game. Talk a little bit about recruiting, some of the guys that we expect to see in Mercedes-Benz as Georgia gets ready for this game. Talk about some of the future dogs, what they've done in high school. And we'll wrap up this episode and talk a little bit about UJ Hoops, a new look going into the 2024-25 season. But, guys, let's start from the jump with a question that has been persistent the last few weeks and is still ongoing as we get to Tuesday, and that's the status of running back Trevor Etienne. Kirby Smart was asked on Monday about his availability and got the quote from Kirby, quote, "I don't really talk about any of the other stuff in regards to any of our players with suspensions, but I'm excited about all the guys that are going to get an opportunity to play at back." So didn't answer that. I wasn't necessarily surprised. I think this is a question that is probably going to go into Saturday. And, I was talking with some other people on the beat just about, our expectations, how this might play out. I wouldn't be surprised if we really don't have an answer by the time the game starts. I wouldn't be surprised if Trevor warms up, but then we're just watching to see if number 1 ever goes out there. So I think his status is definitely in question going into this game. And again, we don't have a clear answer. I'll start with you, Kip. Just how much concern do you have for Georgia in the event that Trevor doesn't play and what that would mean for the running backs and the run game against a really good Clemson defense?
Well, I think this is where that offensive line comes into play, but I think we kind of have talked about this all camp where, Georgia's backfield wasn't, expected to be 100%. Well, we've all kind of considered the possibility that Trevor Etienne was going to be suspended. As we record this podcast on Tuesday, I'll say that I don't expect Trevor Etienne to play in this game. We know Roderick Robinson isn't expected to play in this game, so we have mentioned before that Branson Robinson has really come on strong the entire camp, and the possibility of him starting was being mentioned weeks ago. So it's not news. I don't think it's news for Georgia. I think they've prepared for this possibility, and I think it's very fortuitous for them that Branson Robinson does appear to be back and ready to go. And this is a guy that gotten carries, had a lot of success his freshman season. Cash Jones is a guy that has played a lot of football for Georgia, and Nate Frazier's been one of the hottest names in camp, regardless of position. So I think there is a positive in this, and that running back, that's a position you come in, are we going zone left, zone right? They can, just carry the football. It's something that, they have the instincts to do. It's really going to be about pass pro. Can Branson Robinson back and ready to perform well in that regard? They probably know what they have in Cash Jones in that regard. A true freshman, Nate Frazier, as well as Chauncey Bowens. You're asking those guys to come in and protect against, like you said, one of the more talented defensive fronts that Georgia's going to face all season. So for me, I think really the pressure is on this offensive line. They got to go out there and set the tone in this football game. And I think that's the plan. I think they are going to go out there with the expectation that they are going to maul this Clemson defensive line from start to finish, establish their dominance at the line of scrimmage, and then allow Georgia to use their entire playbook and game plan. So I don't think there's really a reason to be worried about this, because I think it's a situation that still plays into Georgia's strength. And I think it's also a situation where Georgia prepared for this. If you remember a year ago, Kendall Milton dinged up, Dejon Edwards dinged up, Roderick Robinson dinged up. They had Andrew Paul as like the only healthy back at this point. And so it's not a situation that, it's a different opponent. We're not playing Tennessee Martin here, but it is a situation that Georgia has had, they've seen before. And when you have a returning quarterback like Carson Beck, they have a guy that they can lean on. They're not leaning on a first-year starter anymore. This is a guy that they know what he brings to the table. And I think that really bodes well for Georgia to be able to go into this game, top 15 matchup, and come out with a W.
Okay, you think about if they did not have Branson Robinson, are you trying to move Dylan Bell back from receiver to get him some snaps? And Kipp mentioned this, Roderick Robinson had been dealing with a toe injury. Kirby confirmed he had had surgery, considers him week to week. I don't see him as an option against Clemson. I think it's going to be a little bit before Roderick comes back. Ben, what do you make of this situation in regards to Trevor Etienne, and if you have concerns about what's left in the running back room getting ready for week one?
Well, in terms of what I know, I don't know what the answer is going to be on Trevor Etienne on Saturday. In terms of what I think, I agree with Kipp. I'm not expecting him to play. I feel like if he was playing, Kirby Smart would have said at this point that he was playing. I feel like he wouldn't have muddied the waters as much as he has at the running back position if we knew that it was going to be a full go with the running back core. So I think even when Carson, if we're being honest, we're just reading between the lines. When Carson Beck was asked about the running backs yesterday, he immediately brought up Branson Robinson, which I think was him jumping to like, this is what you can kind of expect in the Clemson game. And I think that Nate Frazier is a name that's popped a lot this spring or this fall. And I think that, again, if he had been here all spring, I don't think there would be nearly the amount of concerns there would be with Trevor Etienne and Roderick Robinson potentially out. And so, but I think that he is someone that is going to get some reps on Saturday. I think Cash Jones is going to get some opportunities on Saturday as well. I think my bigger question, and we talked a little bit about this off air yesterday, Jordan, was like, how many carries does Georgia's leading rusher have? Or, I like if Branson Robinson has the most carries, how many carries is that? I don't really know what the answer is. Like, is it pushing double digits? I don't know. Is this going to be a Carson heavy football game? Possibly. And if so, I think that's really an interesting game plan. If it does go that way, like if you are putting all of the faith in Carson's arm and he's throwing it a lot more than you maybe would have anticipated to in this game, we're going to learn a lot about Georgia's weapons on the perimeter that are relatively new weapons. So I think that whichever way Georgia goes, whether they do still try and go the approach that Kipp's mentioning, where it's still dominate the line of scrimmage, prove that it doesn't really matter who's back there, they're going to dominate the line of scrimmage. That's a route that they could definitely go. But I also think that if we're looking on Saturday night and it's like, all right, Anthony Evans had a big game on the perimeter, Dylan Bell had a big game on the perimeter, Arian Smith had a big game, and like guys that are theoretically, I know Dylan Bell's not down the depth chart at wide receiver, but like guys that haven't necessarily established themselves as those wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2 types at Georgia, if they've had big games, because Carson Beck's thrown it a lot on Saturday, that wouldn't surprise me at all, just given the availability at running back. And as I start to tally up, how many carries do I see as reasonable for Branson to get, and how many carries do I see as reasonable for Cash or Nate Frazier to get? The number doesn't end up being that high for me in terms of how many times Georgia's going to run the ball. And for that reason, I think that Georgia's, Carson Beck's going to have a lot of opportunities to have a big day on Saturday.
Well, let's jump on that, Ben, because I think it is an interesting conversation. In this hypothetical, let's say Trevor Etienne does not play and Branson Robinson is your leading rusher. Would you go over under 9.5 carries for Branson when Saturday is said and done?
I mean, I think that's a good one because I think 8 to 10 to me just sounds right for any of the running backs that are getting carries. But if he is the first guy that can go, I would assume he's going to hit double digits, like maybe just scratching it. But I mean, again, Kirby's even mentioned like they're happy with the progress that he's made, but they did plan on him being on, I don't know if it's a pitch count or limited availability or whatever, but they don't want to just jump into Branson Robinson taking 15, 20 carries a game coming off of the injury that he came off of. So I don't think that that's a situation that they're going to do that. And that's where, as much as it might surprise people, like I think seeing Cash Jones get a little bit more on Saturday than you would have anticipated would not surprise me at all.
I think I would go slightly over. I think like 10. And like Ben just said, Kirby talked about load management and didn't say necessarily what that means for Branson. But I think that they are smart enough to know, one, they don't want to overload him week one against, a really good defense. He's going to get hit hard on the carries he takes. But two, understanding that it's a long-term deal and they want him healthy going forward. Kipp, what would you do on a 9.5 over under Branson Robinson carries for Saturday?
I'd take the over just because all plans go out the window when you got the hot hand and Branson's running downhill, getting 6 and 8 yards a carry. It's going to be tough to take him out. I just think that Kirby's going to see what the moment and the situation dictates. And I think you can see Branson having 12 carries. I mean, I as high as 15. I think you give Cash Jones, 8 touches, Nate Frazier 6 to 8. You still got Chauncey Bowens in there as well. I think, he's not being talked about enough about, as Ben mentioned, a guy who was actually there in the spring. And so I think he can get 3 or 4 touches as well. You spread the love around there enough, you're going to have, before you know it, 32 touches, the balance that Mike Bobo is looking for in his offense. But I just think if Branson's coming down and breaking tackles and looking like the guy he was before the injury, it's going to be tough to keep him off the field. I get load management, but, at the end of the day, they got to come out there and establish, again, not just dominance, but they got to make sure that they win this football game because this is a very, very talented Clemson team.
Running through our score predictions from the game-by-game prediction podcast we did last week, I had Georgia 30-17. Kipp had Georgia 31-17. Ben had Georgia 34-17. I'll start with each of you and start with you, Ben. Do you feel any differently about that score prediction, 34-17, just with these questions we got at running back?
Not really. Like if I were to make an adjustment, it probably would be just seeing some of the clock rules in the Florida State Georgia Tech game and feeling like possessions are going to be more limited in some of these openers. And, for that, I don't think that my gap that I would give Georgia would change at all. But I'm sticking with 34-17 because nothing's really changed to me in terms of the two teams. But if it was more in the, 28-10 range, that wouldn't really surprise me either.
Kipp, what about you? You had 31-17. Would you change that at all?
No, I kind of went into that with the expectation that Georgia's going to be without both of those running backs. I mean, I know nothing's official because, again, Kirby Smart's not going to give you, Clemson any intel other than what he's being forced to give them. And with no injury requirements as far as establishing everyone's availability, then as far as he's concerned, everyone's available publicly. And so I think that we kind of had heard, what was going on in the backfield, and we think Georgia's been preparing for this situation. This is not new, and I think they've had enough practices to where they have a game plan established. They know how they're going to use their backfield, but at the same time, you might have more obvious passing downs. Again, avoiding 3 and outs is going to be key. You don't want to give Clemson extra possessions. But I still think that my original score prediction is going to ring true. And I think that this is going to be a very impressive matchup with Clemson's front 7.
Jerry Bells on Facebook was asking if ETN had been cleared. As we said a little bit earlier in this episode, have not heard one way or the other, but based on what we have heard to this point, we do not expect him to play on Saturday. And as I always like to remind you guys, stay glued to dogs247.com. If we hear anything one way or the other, we will have the updates over there. So let's jump into some of what Kirby Smart had to say on Monday, looking at Clemson. A lot of good stuff from his interviews. I think Kip's going to have a story a little bit later on Tuesday. Thought it was interesting, him kind of defending the way that Dabo Swinney doesn't use the portal. Said, that he would love to do that too, but the fact that you lose so many players, basically out of necessity, you got to go in the portal. Said some good things about Matt Luke. Said he expects the Clemson offensive line to be really physical. Just a staple of a Matt Luke offensive line. Pulled some clips from some of the answers that Kirby gave. And the first one we're going to look at is Kirby talking about Clemson quarterback Cade Klubnik and what the Bulldogs are expecting there.
This really is, his third year, but he's a great, really good athlete. He's played a lot of football for a guy that age. Has the ability to scramble, make plays on his feet, has some more weapons around him. I think he's a lot more comfortable now in their offense. You could see that throughout the year last year as you watch the season go on, how much more comfortable he got, especially when they start going to field a lot more as their feature back and became a much more physical team. So, the addition of Matt Luke, who's a tremendous coach, was here with us. I think that makes them even more versatile in some of the things he's going to bring to the table. But Cade's been a great asset for them, and I know he'll be, very experienced.
Thought it was interesting hearing a little bit about Klubnik. And like Kirby said, it does seem like he's been there a lot longer. I mean, you can remember him behind DJU and getting a little bit of playing time a couple of years ago, having it turned over to him last season. Wrote about this on Tuesday. He's a capable quarterback, but I think this is going to be a real test for him. He tends to turn the ball over more when Clemson plays its tougher opponents. And I think that's going to be a key if Clemson's going to stay in this game. Ben, what stands out to you just about Cade Klubnik, what he's getting ready to face when he plays Georgia on Saturday?
Well, I think I go to what Micah Williams talked about the first thing when he was asked about Cade Klubnik yesterday too, is like he notices that he's a slippery quarterback, that he knows how to get out of the pocket and extend plays. And I think that if Clemson's going to find success against Georgia on Saturday, he's going to have to do that a lot, because I think that Georgia's defensive front is going to try and create havoc. I don't necessarily know that Clemson has the bodies, especially on the interior defensive line or offensive line rather, to stop Georgia from creating a lot of havoc defensively on Saturday. And I think that Cade Klubnik's going to be running for his life at times, anytime that he's trying to hold the ball longer than 3 to 4 seconds. And so because of that, that's what I look at, is his extend the play ability. And if he's able to do that more often than he's not on Saturday, Clemson might be able to have a little bit more success than I'm expecting them to offensively. But I think that that's a big ask when, your first outing of the year is against a Georgia defensive front.
Yeah, Klubnik had 4 rushing touchdowns last year. His rushing yards weren't crazy, but he can make plays when he has the opportunity. Kip, what do you think about Cade Klubnik, and what sort of stands out to you going into this game?
Well, I'll start with the positive. He made some nice throws in the intermediate range last season. That's kind of where it ends for me, though, because he made a lot of bad decisions with the football, a lot of turnovers, and also took a lot of sacks. And so I think as far as for Clemson to hope to try to return to the playoff, he's got to take a big step, because I think right now I would put him probably middle of the road as far as quarterbacks in college football. I think he's got the skill set, but he's got to make quicker decisions and better decisions, and that comes with confidence. But you have to be aggressive as well. You have to make those reads and go through your progressions. The game has to slow down for him. Now, going into year 2 as a starter, he should be able to do that. And so I think he's got talent around him. He's got playmakers, a wide receiver. They should be able to move the football. He's just got to kind of prove that, he can take that next step. And gosh, that's what Dabo Swinney's looking for as well, because he's trying to get, back to those days when he had elite play at the quarterback position. And I guess that kind of shows, it is a Jimmy's and Joe's game, because people are kind of seeing Dabo Swinney in a different light. And I think it all starts at the quarterback position. So a lot of pressure on Cade to kind of take that program back to its previous heights. But again, I'm interested to see what he does in year 2 as a starter.
Kirby had some good stuff to say about Clemson running back Phil Maffa. Said he's a really physical downhill runner. I think he's somebody that's kind of easy to overlook because you look at Cade Klubnik coming back, but having the leading rusher back, I think, is big as well. Turn our attention to the other side. The group that I am most interested in watching when it comes to Clemson on Saturday is the defensive line. And I think we've talked about them a little bit. TJ Parker, Peter Woods, some of those guys who stood up and played really well for them last season. Kirby was asked about the experience they have on the defensive line, and here's what he had to say.
Paper, and people say, well, they only have a certain number of defensive starters, but two of the best players and most statistically best players they had last year are back, and they were freshmen who technically didn't start. But those guys were dominant players. Parker and Peter Woods both were really good players. And, we knew those guys in recruiting, and they're tremendous athletes and both very productive with other guys coming back. They've got experienced guys coming back. So when you look across the defensive front, Clemson is never going to be short there. They have twitchy, fast, hard-playing guys. The linebacker crew is extremely instinctive and well coached. You can see they carry over from when Brent left. They don't miss things in terms of keys and recognition, and they play really hard on defense.
Guys, I think if Clemson's going to have a chance in this game, it's going to come down to guys like TJ Parker and Peter Woods having good games. And Ben, I don't know, I think you would have been gone by then, but two guys that got out of the state of Alabama. Clemson has done a very good job over the years of recruiting in Alabama and finding the guys who can help them. Ben, what do you think of Clemson's defensive line and maybe more so from the Georgia standpoint, the kind of test that this Georgia offensive line is going to be up against Saturday?
Yeah, I mean, when you look at this Clemson team, if there's anywhere that people are maybe shortchanging Clemson on the whole, I think it's probably because they're not giving enough credit to the defensive front that Clemson has. I mean, you named them: Peter Woods, TJ Parker, Stephylon Green's a freshman that they've got coming in. They've got Barrett Carter at linebacker, obviously. Sammy Brown is a freshman that's coming in at linebacker. All guys that Georgia are very, very familiar with from recruiting them out of the state of Georgia. And if you're just looking at pure talent composite of Clemson's roster, I mean, that's where you're going to find the most talented position groups that Clemson has. And so to your point, I think that if Clemson's going to make this a competitive football game, I mean, they're 13.5-point underdogs. And so Vegas is thinking this is a 2-touchdown game, which says a lot for teams that, I mean, it surprised me. And I think we might've mentioned this last week, but when Clemson was number 5 in the 24/7 Sports team talent composite, there's so much discussion about how that roster's deteriorated. And because they don't do the transfer portal or play NIL the same way or whatever, that roster's not the same. They're still one of the best rosters in college football. And I think that that's not getting talked about enough, but I think a big reason for that is because of this defensive front. And so if it's going to be competitive, I think they need to make it look a lot like the 21 version of this game, where it's a slop fest. Both offenses are struggling to make things happen. Like, I think that's how Clemson, if they draw up how the blueprint for winning this game against Georgia, that's it for them. And I think that the defensive front is where they've got to start with that. Now, I think if you're Georgia, you're feeling pretty confident about how you counter that, because I think that the offensive line is going to be one of Georgia's strongest position units from start to finish this whole season long. I think that it's one of the position units that's ready week 1. I think that it's one of the position units that can handle some of the, depth issues that other groups face with injuries and things like that, just because of the number of guys that I think they can rotate and still be successful on that offensive line. So Georgia has the answers for that. And I think that's what makes things tough for Clemson. But I think there are definitely going to be possessions on Saturday that Georgia just falls flat because a guy on Clemson makes a pop play, wow play on first or second down. Now all of a sudden you're in a 3rd and long situation. Those are just difficult no matter how good your football team is.
Kipp, what do you make of what Clemson's got on the defensive line and the challenge they're going to present on Saturday?
Yeah, I mean, Ben almost took my entire story, so hopefully some of you guys read that today. He pulled a lot of good facts there about Clemson's roster, but it's kind of, opened my eyes a little bit, because not only is Clemson number 5 in the team talent composite, but it's the 3rd year in a row they're number 5. And then if you just go back even further, they were number 4 in 2020 and 2021. So again, I think Dabo does get a lot of heat for his opinion on the transfer portal, but the flip side of that is it promotes, continuity. Those guys stay in the program. We talked a lot about, Clemson's front, and, they have another guy, Peyton Page, who's a senior. He's played in 39 games, over 500 snaps. That's a guy that could have left for, the transfer portal, but stayed there, and they're going to depend on him a lot. And, you rotate in a guy from the state of Georgia and Vic Burley as well. They've got some guys there that, would play for most programs. And for me as a viewer, I mean, isn't that what you want though? Strength on strength. Like that's really like the best games in college football. You get to see these kinds of matchups. And so I do think that this bodes well for Georgia, that they're able to do strength on strength. It's going to be, not having those negative plays early in the drives. I think that that's going to be a key focus for Georgia, is making sure they're in manageable down situations, and that, this defensive front, if they get going, it's going to quicken the pace. It's going to give Carson Beck's going to have to make decisions a lot quicker. And so, you're looking at Bobo's playbook. You can't start going and picking the plays that take 4 to 5 seconds to really get going. A multiple misdirection type plays. If Clemson's defensive line is getting penetration and getting into the backfield, you're going to have to, change it up a little bit and go with some quick strikes. So there's a little bit of a chess match there that might start taking place if Clemson's defensive line gets going. But I still think that Georgia has enough weapons to where they'll be able to keep them on their heels and, not allow them to lose guys to pressure. And if they do bring pressure, I mean, that's opening up Carson Beck a lot of one-on-one situations. So there's still plus and minuses in that. You want to make sure that you're forcing Clemson to not get pressure with 4 guys and to have to send 5 and 6 so that he can get those matchups and take advantage of those.
Ben mentioned a few minutes ago another big key piece of this Clemson defense, and it's linebacker Barrett Carter. 62 tackles, 9.5 tackles for loss, 3.5 sacks last year. Could have gone pro, decides to come back to Clemson, which I think is huge for them. Barrett Carter is a guy that Georgia recruited when he was coming out of high school, so Kirby Smart knows him well. Was asked about Barrett Carter, and this is what Kirby had to say.
Yeah, I mean, he's one of the high academic, went to a great high school right there at North Gwinnett. Just a fun kid to recruit because he had a great personality. He enjoyed recruiting. He was upfront and honest. He didn't get too enamored in the process. He handled it the right way and made the choice that he thought was best for him. And he's become a really good player, a dominant player. And you can see on tape his instincts, his athleticism. I mean, he's a playmaker, and they got a good one in Barrett.
I think it kind of goes hand in hand with what we were just talking about with the defensive line, but I imagine that Barrett Carter's going to have a big day to put Clemson in a position to win this game. Ben, what do you think about what he means to that defense and Georgia's challenge of trying to slow him down on Saturday?
Yeah, great player. I mean, you look at him and Sammy Brown, there's not many linebackers in the state of Georgia that Georgia's losing out on. So credit to Clemson for having 2 guys like that on their roster. And I think Clemson's probably pretty surprised that Barrett Carter came back this season. I don't think going into, I remember even talking to Sammy Brown last summer when he was committing to Clemson, that a big pitch from Clemson was that they were expecting to lose their starting linebackers from last year. And so they've got to be feeling great about having a guy like that sort of leading the defense going into a game like this. And again, the fact that they don't just have talented guys in their defensive front, but they've got talented guys from the state of Georgia adds a lot of juice to this game. I mean, it feels in some ways almost like a lot of old school Auburn games where Auburn's just loaded with Georgia rosters, and they, there's almost like a grit that Auburn has going into some of those games. And so I'm interested to see how this matchup goes, because there's been a lot of talk all offseason like it's a foregone conclusion that Georgia's going to win this football game. And I think that our predictions, Vegas lines, they all match up with that sentiment on things. But I'm sure that Clemson's been hearing this, and, they're a football program that's not too far removed from championship pedigree. And, they've won their conference pretty consistently recently up until last season. So,
Yeah, you mentioned Barrett Carter, and those Georgia guys on that roster are going to be fired up. And we've pointed this out before. There's going to be a whole lot of Clemson orange in Mercedes-Benz Stadium, so that they're going to have people backing them for sure. Kip, what do you think about Barrett Carter and his role in Clemson and what he could do and the issues he could cause on Saturday?
I mean, he's a heat-seeking missile. I love him and what he brings to the table. He honestly, you hear Kirby Smart talk about him like that's a guy that would have fit right in Georgia's defense. I mean, he's got that Roquan Smith type skill set that he brings to the field. And yeah, I mean, he's going to be a first round pick next year. I think that he's in the mix for the best linebacker in college football this year. And again, we talk about the defensive front. Also, RJ Mickens at safety has played a lot of football. You talk about guys that have come back to Georgia and utilize that extra year that are going to play important roles for Georgia, like Xavier Truss. You got Warren Brenton and Nazir Stackhouse. Well, RJ Mickens has played like almost 50 games. And he's been a really solid player for them the last 2 years. The NFL legacy. His father was an All-American at Texas A&M. Ray Mickens played in NFL. So that's a guy that I think will also hear his name called in the NFL draft next year, probably 4th, 5th round. But he's a guy that can be like a Tyke Smith type player for them this year and really, probably be their top playmaker in the secondary. So I think it's a guy, 6 foot, 210 pounds. One that you really have to watch. I know Carson Beck and the coaching staff have probably seen a lot on film that says, hey, we need to keep an eye on where he is on the field as well. So not just the defensive front. They got a couple guys in the secondary that are going to be able to challenge Georgia offensively in this game as well.
Yeah, they lose Jeremiah Trotter Jr. to the NFL, but again, getting Barrett Carter back is definitely huge for that Clemson defense. Kip mentioned Carson Beck. We had a chance to talk to him as well as Michael Williams. I'd encourage everyone to go to our YouTube and watch both of those interviews. But I had a clip of Carson talking about essentially how much control he has in the offense as far as audibles and things like that. And I thought his answer was really interesting. And the point that he brings up in it, the fact he's been in the offense for quite a while, I think that can benefit Georgia quite a bit.
I mean, there's always parameters of our offense, whether that's checking a play or checking a protection, or if we're in this play, we want to go to this play. There's always parameters, but I definitely feel very confident in what we do and our plan and what Coach Bobo has called. He does a great job at looking at a defense, scheming out the defense, and finding certain plays and ways to get the ball into the guys that we want the ball in their hands, if that makes sense. But for me personally, just going out there and being able to play loose and play free, because I do understand the offense like I'm in the back of my hand. It's every play can get called. I understand exactly where I need to go with the ball for a certain coverage. I know exactly what play we need to check to if they're doing this as a defense. I mean, there's so many things. I've been in offense for 5 years, so I know it like the back of my hand. I'm very comfortable with it, which allows me to play even faster.
Ben, I don't know if that struck you when we were in the room when he was talking, but to hear your quarterback say, I know the offense like the back of my hand, if I'm a Georgia fan, that would have me really excited. What did you think about what Carson had to say just in general? And then again, how comfortable he feels going into another year in this offense?
Well, my number one takeaway, Jordan, not to get unserious for a second, is I don't even know how well I know the back of my hand. So I've always wondered about that. Saying. But what I will say is you can sense the confidence off of Carson Beck this season. I mean, you can tell really in every opportunity that we've had, and you could sense it last year. And I think Kirby Smart talked about that all last season, that confidence and composure is nothing that you ever have to worry about with Carson Beck. And so I think that you're seeing that even more so this year. I think I thought it was funny. Kirby Smart was asked yesterday, like, how confident are you about Carson Beck going into this season? He was like, I was confident about Carson Beck going into last season. And I think that showed in the fact that he named Carson Beck his starter last year without really even being asked about it in a press conference. And I think that going into year 2 of a guy that you really feel good about, I'm sure Kirby Smart and Mike Bobo are sleeping better than they have in a really long time when it comes to the quarterback position, just because I think they feel good about what they have behind Carson Beck more so than they probably have had in years past. And then when you look at the starting quarterback, I mean, you can just sense it in every situation that you're in with him, that he feels like he is the starting quarterback at the University of Georgia. And there's no doubts about that. And, you know, despite a lot of the hype around Heisman campaigns or, you know, first round draft pick opportunities or whatever it might be, you just don't feel any kind of change with him. And I think that that's the big thing with him is you're just getting an even keeled guy week after week.
Kipp, what about you? What stands out to you about Carson, you know, him saying how comfortable he is with this offense and really the opportunity he and this offense have going into 2024?
Yeah, I mean, he's been cool as a cucumber since, you know, his first start, regardless of, you know, what's been asked of him. But, yeah, I think he's ready for this challenge. And everyone's talked about the guys that he doesn't have on the roster, but I mean, he still has his leading receiver from last year. So he doesn't know the, you know, lean on Bowers and Ladd McConkey, you know, that Stetson Bennett was able to do. And guys like A.D. Mitchell, he just knows the guys that he threw to last year, and he didn't throw to anyone more than Dominic Lovett. And so I just think that people are talking a lot about who he doesn't have to throw to, but you have to remember he's got his top receiver. He's got Dylan Bell and Arian Smith. They've had big moments for Georgia. And he's got Oscar Delp, who played as much football as anyone on that offense last season. So I think he knows that he's got guys he can trust early on this season. And he's got some great transfers that have come in, and he's going to, you know, develop that chemistry as the season goes on. So I think he also has to be really excited about the fact that he probably has the best offensive line in college football protecting him. So, yeah, of course he's cool as a cucumber because he's been given, you know, the keys to, you know, I don't want to say it, but the Lambo of college football. I mean, that's about as good an NIL deal as you can get. So, you know, I think the pressure of playing quarterback for the University of Georgia is built in. And I think you can't really ask for someone who seems to have the right composure, which is one of Kirby Smart's favorite attributes to lead Georgia this season.
Kipp always has such a way with words. That's why we love having him on the podcast. We're going to take a quick break, come back, talk about some of the recruits we're going to see in Mercedes-Benz Stadium, talk a little bit of the high school football news and recruiting news, and talk a little UGA hoops. Ben, Georgia's going to have an opportunity to have some recruits in Mercedes-Benz Stadium on Saturday. What can you tell us about what you know on that front and the people to keep an eye out for on Saturday?
Well, there's going to be a lot of guys in Mercedes-Benz Stadium from the 25, 26, 27 classes. We're talking about the committed ranks, the uncommitted ranks. And so I'll sort of go in through, you know, some of those various groupings that I would give. I mean, Georgia's going to have a bunch of commits that are going to be at that game. Some of the usual in-state suspects, you know, Juan Gaston, Mason Shore, Ethan Barbour, guys that are going to be at just about every Georgia game, and you can pretty much just pencil them into every Georgia visitors list throughout the season. The one that probably intrigues me the most is Tyler Williams, just because he's an out-of-state guy. Schools like Miami, Auburn a little bit recently as well have started recruiting him. Well, Miami was recruiting him hard the entire time and probably thought that they were the front runners to get him when he committed to Georgia in June. But he has family in the Atlanta area, so it makes a lot of sense for him to come hang out in Atlanta, go to the Georgia game that's going to be in Atlanta. But just getting him at a Georgia game week 1 is really important for making sure, just establishing, you know, the season-long drip of getting him on campus, getting him at games as much as you can. I expect him to be at Athens at some point as well. I talked about this on the recruiting show, the 24/7 Sports recruiting show yesterday, but I mean, it's impossible to talk about who's going to be at this Georgia game without starting with the 5-star defensive lineman. Justice Terry, he's going to be at the game with his parents. I've also confirmed that Elijah Griffin, he's going to be at the game as well with his 2027 Edge teammate, LaDamian Guyton. And so those two 5-star defensive linemen are the most important recruits for Georgia in any class for the next 3 months. And so I think that anytime you get either of them on campus, not on campus, but at a Georgia game, really important. Anytime you get them both at a Georgia game, I mean, that's just huge news for the Bulldogs. Also, Usmani Chroma, running back from Lee County, is an uncommitted guy that I think will be interesting to see. There are going to be guys that are committed elsewhere. There's running back Shane Marshall, who's committed to Minnesota right now. I'm actually going to see him and Zayden Walker, who will also be at the game on Saturday. I'm going to go see those two guys play against each other in South Georgia or Middle Georgia, or however you would define it on the Georgia map on Friday before the Georgia Clemson game. And so I'm excited to see those two face off against each other. It'll be my first time seeing Shane Marshall in person, and I believe it'll be his first time seeing a Georgia game at anywhere whatsoever. So good to get him in person. I will say, check out Dogs 24/7. I'm going to have a more thorough visitors list that I put up later today or Tuesday, August 27th. There is one guy that's committed to another program in the 25 class at a position of need that I am expecting to be at the game. I haven't reported on it yet, but if you subscribe to Dogs 24/7, you'll be able to get that. And there'll be more updates on people that I would expect at Georgia throughout the week as well.
There's a reason we call them the best in the business, folks. Kipp, when you look generally at having guys in town for a big marquee game, just how big this weekend can be for Georgia? Obviously, it's not in Athens, but for some big-time recruits to be watching Georgia and to see them go up against a top 15 opponent.
Yeah, I mean, Georgia's got a chance to still push for the number one ranked class this cycle. And, right now, battling for top 3, I think there's a lot of guys out there who may be committed to other programs that won't sign with those programs. I mean, Kirby Smart's going to flip some guys in this class. And, getting guys in a setting like this where, it may or may not be reported. I suspect Ben will probably have the news on who all is there, but you can go to a setting like this and sit and potentially avoid the media but see, Georgia play a top 15 matchup in a different setting. And Mercedes-Benz is, probably going to feel like a home game for Georgia, even though Clemson's going to have some guys there. But at the same time, it's kind of a chance to give them just an unbiased view of how Georgia performs, and you can have a big impact. I mean, we've seen the big Georgia wins over the last couple of years under Kirby Smart has really made a big impression with recruits, and it's paid off. There's been a trickle-down effect from that with a lot of guys, and they've mentioned it when they announced. Like, I saw Georgia win at Notre Dame. I saw Georgia, win the national championship game. So I just think that with some of the guys that maybe Georgia did not come in number one in the initial decision, they might still come in number one at the end. And that's kind of why, Kirby Smart is the recruiter that he is, because that guy publicly committing to someone is only going to establish who he's competing against when it all is said and done. So I do expect Georgia to flip multiple guys before the end of this cycle at positions in need. I'm interested to see what they do at the running back position. If they bring in another running back along Bo Walker, I'm interested to see, what they do at the linebacker position as well. And so I will be very intrigued to see what news comes out of this and what guys they get on campus, because it's a big time matchup and a chance to really make, an additional impression with some of the top guys in the country.
Ben, you've done another story on the Future Dog Watch. What a bunch of the high school guys that Georgia has either landed or fighting hard to land were able to do last week. What stood out to you from this weekend of high school football and some of the Georgia targets that really showed out?
I'm so sorry to divert from this, because I'm going to answer that question directly right after this. But we just got an email from the Aflac Kickoff that I have to report on. The Penguins at the Georgia Aquarium. They picked the Georgia Clemson game, and they did pick Georgia to win. I don't want to miss the names of these penguins. Pambo, Bat, and Fahari are the African penguins that picked Georgia to beat Clemson. Sorry to divert from that, but that was important stuff that we just got from Aflac. And
that was huge. I mean, to get that live, I mean, this is why this is Georgia fans' #1 podcast. And if it's not, it better be after today.
All right. So to answer the question that you people probably care about a little bit more, that Jordan asked. So Georgia had a lot of standout performances. More and more guys are having, week 1, week 2 performances now. Zayden Walker, he's a linebacker that he had 11 tackles on Friday, and someone that you're probably going to be looking at double-digit tackles over and over every week when I do these things and put them out. Elias Williams is someone that we talked about last week. I'm really excited to see Elias Williams in this new look offense at Camden County. I'm trying to figure out if I'm going to be able to get down to the Camden County Valdosta game, because that's going to be a really fun game to watch. I don't know that I'm going to be able to make it work with Georgia's schedule, but Camden County, they're fun to watch with Elias Williams, who had 70 yards on Friday. And then Todd Robinson down at Valdosta, he's another guy that every single week I'm telling you this is going to be what did Todd Robinson do at quarterback this past week? 15 to 20 passing, 182 yards, 2 touchdowns. He also had 53 yards rushing and another 2 touchdowns on the ground as well. That's going to be a regular occurrence for Todd Robinson. In the 2026 class, well, actually, I'll mention Tyler Williams in the 2025 class. He had his first week 1 performance down at Armwood in the Tampa area. 3 catches, 95 yards, 1 touchdown. I talked with his coach actually yesterday after his first game at Armwood, and his coach just right when he responded to me said, "This guy is so special." Put special in all capital letters. And so I just think that he's someone that I'm excited to watch how his season plays out. And then I'd be remiss if I did not mention Jared Curtis. He had his first game of the season as well, and he was 20 of 27 for 294 yards and 2 touchdowns. He also had 35 yards rushing with 3 rushing touchdowns, so accounted for 5 touchdowns in his first game of the year. So I know that Georgia fans are going to be really excited about every update that they get on Jared Curtis for the next couple of seasons.
Been some tough news on Monday with 2025 quarterback commit Ryan Montgomery suffering an season-ending ACL injury. What can you tell us about the situation and just what you see going forward for Ryan Montgomery?
Total bummer. I mean, there's no other, you feel before you talk about anything with this, you just feel for the guy. I mean, this is someone we talked about a bunch this offseason, that he spent the whole offseason pretty much proving to Georgia why he was the guy that made sense for this recruiting class. And he finally did that. And then he had an opportunity to kind of go and show out. I mean, it was his first drive of his season. He's 2 for 3, 33 yards passing, and then just kind of a freak play. He gets up, someone gets underneath him, and his legs kind of flail into the air. He comes back into the game for a play after the incident happened, and then he just had to limp off. And yeah, like Jordan said, got the reports on Sunday and Monday from the MRI that he tore his ACL, and it's going to take, it's an unfortunate thing because he doesn't get his senior season. It probably cuts into what he's able to do next spring when he gets into Georgia as an early enrollee. Just, sad all around. And I'm sure that he's still sort of working through some of the emotions of it all because it's very fresh for him. Obviously stinks for his Findlay High School football team as well, because they run, a offense that really is putting all of the weight on Ryan's shoulders to operate that offense. And so they run a lot of empty, and so there's a lot put on the quarterback. And so, things have changed up for them significantly here going forward as well. So just a bummer. It doesn't really change anything from a recruiting standpoint or anything like that. I mean, he's Georgia's quarterback in the class. I mean, I think there was always going to be conversation about what else. Does Georgia do anything else in 2025? Probably not. But do they do something at the portal in the spring or after the season? Or do they maybe do 2 in 2026? I mean, these were all conversation points before this injury happened. So there's nothing really new on that front. But my big takeaway from it all is I can't. I've multiple times throughout the last 24 hours, I've just been sitting there shaking my head being like, man, that stinks for Ryan. I just hate that, because he's the type of kid you root for. He's the type of kid that's worked really hard to get to the point that he's at, and for it to kind of just his senior season to be taken away from him, just the not some fun side of football.
Yeah, definitely sending our best wishes for Ryan Montgomery. And as his father said on social media, he's going to attack it, and definitely won't be surprised to see him come back better than ever. All right, guys, Georgia men's basketball minute, 2 pieces of news. And we're going to start with what we learned on Friday. Georgia officially announced its non-conference schedule for the 2024-25 season. I'm going to roll through this really quick. Georgia's going to have scrimmages at Charlotte and at home against UCF. Then home games against Tennessee Tech, Texas Southern, North Florida. And then November 15th, they're going to play at Georgia Tech. That is going to be the night before Georgia hosts Tennessee in football. After that, Georgia hosts Alabama A&M. And then they've got 2 games in the Bahamas against Marquette and St. John's. Come back home and host Jacksonville. Then on December 3rd, they're going to host Notre Dame in the SEC-ACC Challenge. After that, they have about an 11-day break for finals. They're going to play Grand Canyon in Atlanta's State Farm Arena as part of Holiday Hoops Giving. And to end non-conference play, they're going to host Buffalo, Charleston Southern, and South Carolina State. So I'm going to start with you, Kipp. What do you make of the non-conference schedule Georgia's got and the opportunity that they may have going into Mike White's 3rd year?
I'm pumped for that Holiday Hoops Giving. I mean, first game between Georgia and Grand Canyon, and you get to see it at State Farm Arena. That's going to be a rocking venue, and fans will probably really enjoy seeing that non-conference game. But Charleston Southern, Buffalo, I mean, those are solid games to have in Athens. South Carolina State, but next year will pull no favors whatsoever when they start conference play. So I think you got to get some momentum going there to end the year, and I think that's going to be the key for Georgia, is making sure you have your rotation locked in, stay healthy, and get some chemistry going with some of the new guys. They brought in some impact transfers, but I just think you want to kind of know who you can trust by the end of the year. So, like I said, excited to see them at State Farm Arena. I know there's going to be a lot of wins between that game and the Hawks' home schedule this season. It should be a lot of fun for people who enjoy going to see basketball in State Farm Arena. They just had a huge WNBA game as well. But I think that the expectations are now, I mean, again, you gotta break that 30 win mark, and I think or that 20 win mark. Sorry, 30 wins would be incredible, but I think you got to take that next step. This is it. And Georgia's football schedule is tough. This basketball schedule, I think, is just as difficult. So I like the challenge, and good luck to Mike White.
Ben, what about you? Anything stand out to the non-con schedule Georgia's playing this season?
Well, I mean, we talked recently about the SEC schedule, and it's just such a difficult stretch that you got to win these games. And that's the case for everybody nationally, but it's been the case for Georgia, especially like knowing sort of where you're probably going to fall in the SEC and what your projected record range could even be in SEC play. You've got to win your non-conference games. And so you want to have a good enough schedule that it improves all of the metrics for the committee when you're if you're going to be a bubble team, you want to have as good of a resume as possible. But at the same time, you also have to win the amount of games necessary to even be in the conversation. And so that's really what it comes down to non-conference play with Georgia in this year. And to Kipp's point, it's a critical year for Mike White's program and like what the trajectory of this is going to look like going forward. Winning your non-conference games is where it is. Because if you drop a handful of games in non-conference play, you're going to have some headaches once the SEC play finally starts.
To that exact point, looking at their non-conference schedule, I'll go out and say between at Georgia Tech, between the Bahamas games, Marquette, St. John's, the Atlanta or the home game against Notre Dame, and then the Atlanta game against Grand Canyon, I don't think you can afford more than 3 losses. And that's going to be a very tough challenge. But, they went 10-3 in non-conference play last year, and it set them up fairly well going into the season. And, obviously by the time they got to the second month of SEC play, it didn't work out. But yeah, it's a tough non-con. I give them credit for playing it because, there are some games that are really going to be worth watching. And I'll even say this, I'll be interested to watch that UCF exhibition because UCF's usually pretty solid. It'll be fun to try to get a gauge early on where this Georgia team is. Another bit of news for Georgia men's basketball and women's basketball. Stegeman Coliseum, guys, has a new look on the court. Got the picture pulled up right here. I want to get y'all's opinion. We got the bulldog now on the back of the G in the middle. I'll start with you, Kipp. What do you think of the new look of the floor in Stegeman Coliseum?
I mean, that was a pretty productive day for them. They got it done, and I texted you. I mean, it's a retro look. I thought that it reminded me of home field apparel. Just bringing back some older logos and just a clean look. And yeah, I love it because when they had this look before, I mean, Georgia basketball was a bigger figure than it is now. So why not go back and try to bring back that same level of success and get them back? That should be the standard. But overall, yeah, I love the seats, the black seats. It just overall creates an outstanding overall dynamic. Could use a little bit more red, but I get it. You're going with this scheme, and at the end of the day, if they get to the tournament, it'll be probably their favorite look they've had in recent years.
True on YouTube says beautiful. I'm a big fan of it as well. I do like Kipp said, kind of a throwback look. I like even just the color of the floor and the way it looks. Ben, what do you think of the new look?
I dig it. I mean, I was wondering yesterday, a little behind the scenes look, that our media workroom was down in Stegeman after the Kirby Smart press conference, and they were very stern with us. Do not go onto the basketball court. And we tried our best to sneak out there on our way out, and they said, no. And I was like, what kind of top secret mission is going on? I thought they were just redoing the floor. Little did I know that they were completely giving it a facelift. But I like it. I think that the basketball program needs a little bit of change, just the vibes. I think just anything helps, and I think a new floor looks good. I like the retro feel to it. I like the color scheme that they're going with, and so yeah, I like it a lot. And to Kipp's point, if they win a lot of games in it, it doesn't really matter probably what it looks like. So if they win a lot of games this season, people are probably going to want this forever.
Shout out to Georgia women's basketball. Big news on Monday night. 5-star guard Aubrey Beckham commits to the Bulldogs from Hebron Christian Academy in Georgia. 5'11" guard. Shout out to Coach Abe because she's trying to rebuild that thing, and it seems like Aubrey Beckham, that is a big win as she continues working to make that happen. All right, we're going to wrap this episode up. I did want to make sure and point out that on Wednesday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, I will go live with Clemson 24/7's Austin Hannon. We're going to jump full bore into the Clemson Tigers, learn more about the roster, learn about what they've been saying this week, and give some previews and predictions for Saturday's game. So make sure you don't miss that. Appreciate everyone who watched this live, everyone who is watching or listening to this after the fact. If you haven't already, be sure and go subscribe to dogs247.com. Also subscribe to our YouTube. We've got Kirby Smart press conferences, player interviews. When we get to basketball season, we'll have the same thing from Mike White and company. Also go to Dogs247 on TikTok. We're going to have a lot of clips from the interviews that we've done, a lot of standalone videos we're doing to get ready for another season. A lot of fun going on there. So for Kipp Adams and Ben Wolk, I'm Jordan Hill. Until next time, take care, everybody.